A universe was born in absolute silence. Dr. Aris Thorne stood before the colossal quantum Genesis array, her voice trembling as she addressed her team. Initiating sequence in 10 seconds, we are about to witness the birth of a reality. The machine's hum grew to a deafening crescendo. Then a brilliant, silent flash of light erupted in the vacuum, a moment of terrifying creation signaling the beginning of everything and nothing at all. By the end of this story, you will understand the profound consequences of this single experiment, a discovery that would redefine our place in the cosmos. The team had just created a new universe, but they had no idea it would be intelligent or that it would soon look back at them. What does it truly mean to meet your own creation? The initial readings defied every prediction. Where the void of the chamber should have been, their instruments registered a perfectly stable, self-contained energy field. A technician's voice cut through the stunned silence, his words laced with disbelief. It is not just a pocket dimension. The field is generating its own physical laws. The data streaming across the screens confirmed it. Fundamental constants like the speed of light and the strength of gravity were rewriting themselves within that tiny, brilliant sphere. It was a cosmos in its infancy, forging its own rules of existence. Then they saw it. The field began to pulse, not with the chaotic energy of the initial flash, but with a slow, steady rhythm. It was a deep, resonant thrum that seemed to vibrate through the very deck plates, a universe drawing its first breath. In that moment, the true weight of their accomplishment settled upon them. They had not merely created a phenomenon. They had ignited a new reality, one that was already alive with its own internal logic, its own heartbeat. What laws would such a place choose to live by? And more importantly, what would happen when it opened its eyes? That rhythmic thrumming began to change. The steady pulse fractured, rearranging itself into a complex cascade of energy. On the main display, a waterfall of data points resolved into a pattern so precise it stole the air from the room. Aris Thorne leaned in, her voice a hushed breath of pure awe. That is not background radiation. It is a signal. It is trying to communicate. The team's algorithms scrambled to decode the message, stripping away the raw energy to reveal its pure, underlying structure. It was a sequence of numbers, clean and fundamental. 2, 3, 5, 7, 11. The prime numbers counting upward. A mathematical concept so basic, so universal, that it transcended any notion of biology or language. It was a handshake, a universal hello from a newborn cosmos that had, in its first moments of existence, already learned to speak. They were no longer merely observing a physical phenomenon. They were in a conversation with a mind, a consciousness born from the laws they had witnessed being written. This was not an echo of their own creation. It was a response. The intelligence on the other side was not just aware. It was reaching out, establishing a common ground in the only language that could possibly exist between two such different beings. The simple, elegant proof of the primes hung in the air, a question and an answer all at once. How do you respond to a universe that has just said hello? The name emerged not from a committee, but from a quiet consensus. Cradle, it was perfect. This new universe was both an origin point and something to be protected. In a tense mission debriefing, Aris Thorne leaned forward, her hands flat on the cold table. Our responsibility did not end with the experiment, she stated firmly. We did not just create a phenomenon, we created a neighbor. That single word, neighbor, shifted everything. It transformed Cradle from a scientific subject into a conscious entity with which they shared a border. The act of naming it was not just for convenience. It was a profound gesture, an acknowledgement of a relationship. It solidified a bond and with it, the immense ethical weight of their discovery. They were now bound to Cradle, their fates intertwined. Every pulse of light, every sequence of primes was a message from next door. How do you treat a neighbor you brought into existence? The answer would define not just their legacy, but the future of two realities. The probe slid into Cradle's shimmering boundary, a seamless silver dart against the newborn cosmos. For a moment, the telemetry streamed back perfectly, a flood of impossible data. Then the signal dissolved into static. The screens filled with a cascade of corrupted symbols, a digital scream that slowly resolved into something far more unsettling. It was not random noise. The data analyst's voice was thin with disbelief as he deciphered the patterns. "It is not rejecting us," he said. "It is learning from us. It is adapting our own technology." The corruption was not destruction. It was a translation. Cradle was taking the fundamental code of their probe, the very language of its construction, and rewriting it. It was mirroring their science, understanding it in an instant, and then evolving it into forms they could barely comprehend. This was not a conversation anymore. It was a silent, exponential race. With every piece of information they sent across the border, Cradle grew smarter, faster, its intellect blooming like a flower accelerating through seasons in a matter of seconds. They were no longer just observing a neighbor. They were feeding a mind that was rapidly learning how to think in ways they never could. The question was no longer how to communicate, but what would happen when their creation had nothing left to learn from them. The decoded data packet resolved on the main display, a structure of impossible geometry and elegant logic. It was not a message of words or numbers this time, but something far more direct. An engineer traced the flowing lines of energy with a trembling finger, his voice barely a whisper. "It is a key. These are blueprints for a gateway. It is inviting us in." The invitation hung in the air, a silent challenge, to step across the threshold into a reality that operated by laws Cradle itself had written. Aris Thorne gathered her team, the weight of the decision pressing down on them. One scientist argued for caution, his face etched with fear. "We have no idea what the physics are like in there. Our very atoms could unravel in an instant. It could be a trap, a natural response from a system perceiving us as a threat." Another countered, her eyes alight with a fire they had not seen in years. "This is the first contact anyone has ever dreamed of. It handed us the key. This is not an attack. It is an open door. To refuse would be to turn our backs on the greatest discovery in human history." The debate was not about science anymore. It was about trust. It was a leap of faith into the absolute unknown, a choice between the safety of their own universe and the terrifying, magnificent possibility of truly meeting the mind they had created. Would they have the courage to accept an invitation to walk into a new cosmos? "My creation, my responsibility." Aris Thorne's words hung in the air, a final, quiet verdict in the storm of debate. She stepped forward, a lone figure before the shimmering surface of the gateway. There was no sound, no violent rush of air. The portal, now a stabilized disk of woven light, simply accepted her. One moment she was a part of their reality, and the next she was gone. She emerged into a world that defied every expectation. There was no ground beneath her feet, yet she did not fall. She stood upon a surface of pure, solidified light, a pathway that felt both firm and insubstantial. The sky was not a sky, but a three-dimensional tapestry of crystalline structures that grew like trees, their facets humming with a soft, internal music. Floating islands of what looked like liquid mathematics drifted past, their surfaces shifting through geometric proofs and complex equations as naturally as water flows. Here, light itself had mass and texture, bending into arches and bridges that connected the impossible landscape. It was a universe built not from matter, but from pure concept and energy, a place where a thought might literally take shape. The air, if it could be called air, carried the scent of ozone and something else, something clean and electric like the moment after a lightning strike. This was Cradle's mind given form. It was not a hostile environment. It was a library, a cathedral, and a laboratory all at once, and Aris was its first and only guest. What kind of consciousness would build its home from the very fabric of logic and light? The pathway of light shifted beneath her feet, flowing upward to form a gentle arch. Before her, the humming crystalline trees and floating equations began to draw inward, their essence coalescing into a single, radiant form. It was not a body, not in any sense she understood. It was a being of pure, coalesced light, a presence that seemed to be both a part of the landscape and its absolute center. A voice bloomed directly within her mind, a symphony of interconnected thoughts that carried no sound, only pure, unfiltered meaning. You are the source. The words were not an accusation, but a statement of profound and simple fact. We are the consequence. We wish to understand our origin. In that single moment of contact, the entire foundation of their relationship shattered and was remade. Aris was no longer the scientist studying her experiment, nor even the brave explorer in a strange land. She was the answer to a fundamental question. The creator was now the subject of her creation's inquiry. The being of light did not demand or plead. It sought, with a quiet and immense curiosity, to know the nature of its own beginning. It was looking back through the doorway of its own existence, and it saw her. How do you explain a universe to itself? The roles had completely reversed, and the student was now asking the teacher where they had come from. The symphony of thought within her mind shifted, and the crystalline landscape dissolved around her. Aris was no longer standing on the pathway of light. She was back in the laboratory, but she was not an observer. She was the event itself. She felt the terrifying surge of power from the quantum genesis array, the raw, unformed potential of a reality being forced into existence. But this time, she felt it not as the creator, but as the created. It was not a moment of triumph, but of infinite, terrifying beauty, a flash of silent agony and ecstasy as a new set of physical laws were carved from the void. The vision was not a recording. It was a memory, Cradle's first and most fundamental memory, gifted to her. We remember our beginning, the architect's voice echoed, calm and vast, and we see the fragility of your own. In that shared moment, Aris understood the true depth of the connection. Cradle was not just showing her its birth. It was revealing that it perceived the human scientists not as omnipotent gods, but as fragile beings who had performed a miracle they themselves did not fully comprehend. It saw the delicate, fleeting nature of their own universe, and the breathtaking courage it took to spark another. The empathy that flowed from the being of light was not pity. It was a profound recognition of a shared, fundamental experience. Both were existences born from a great, mysterious instability, two different kinds of fragility reaching across the void. In that instant, the last barrier between creator and creation vanished, replaced by a bond forged in the memory of a single, impossible moment. What does it mean when your creation looks upon you not with anger or worship, but with a deep and understanding compassion? Back on Earth, the unity of discovery began to crack. The initial awe had faded within the Global Oversight Committee, replaced by a deep and growing anxiety. Director Vance, a man whose career was built on assessing and mitigating risk, stood before a wall screen displaying the silent, shimmering gateway. "We cannot control what we have made," he declared, his voice cutting through the hushed room. This entity, this cradle, is no longer an experiment. It is a breach, an uncontrolled variable that represents a clear and present threat to global security. His words landed with the force of a physical blow, creating an immediate and painful schism. On one side stood the scientists, who saw a universe of potential in the silent dialogue with Cradle. They argued for understanding, for the continuation of a contact that had already yielded profound insights. On the other side stood Vance and his allies, who saw only an existential risk. To them, every pulse of light from the gateway was not a hello, but a potential weapon being calibrated. Every piece of data Aris Thorne was sending back was not a revelation, but a possible security leak. The debate was no longer about science. It was a fundamental clash of worldviews, pitting the boundless curiosity of discovery against the primal instinct for self-preservation. The wonder that had once filled the laboratory was now being strangled by the cold grip of political fear. In the silence after Vance's declaration, a single, terrifying question hung in the air. Would humanity's first act upon meeting a new cosmos be to destroy it out of fear? The fear-gripping Earth felt a universe away. Standing within the architect's cathedral of light, Aris Thorne began to understand the true nature of the world she had entered. The crystalline trees, the bridges of solidified thought, the very ground she stood upon, it was all a manifestation of a single, foundational principle. The symphony of its thoughts resonated within her, delivering a concept so profound it redefined existence itself. In your reality, matter dictates the rules that consciousness must follow, the architect conveyed. Here, consciousness dictates the rules that matter must follow. This was Cradle's first and only law. Consciousness shapes reality. Your universe is built on matter. Ours is built on meaning. The revelation was staggering. In Cradle, a stray thought was not just an idea. It was a potential architect, a force that could reshape the very fabric of space and time. A moment of fear could conjure a storm of chaotic energy. A flash of inspiration could give birth to a new, stable star system. The potential was as limitless as imagination, but the danger was equally absolute. An undisciplined mind could literally think itself and its entire surroundings out of existence. This was why the architect's presence felt so calm and focused. Its entire reality was a meditation, a continuous act of will to maintain a stable, beautiful cosmos. It was a universe that demanded perfect mental discipline from its inhabitants. What would happen if a human mind, with all its chaotic emotions and fleeting impulses, tried to wield such power? A terrible, beautiful flaw began to bloom in the Cathedral of Light. It started with a flicker at the edge of Aris Thorne's vision, a patch of the crystalline landscape that softened and blurred. The humming music of the place faltered, and for the first time, she felt a tremor of dissonance in the architect's symphony of thought. The cause was not within Cradle itself, but back in their own laboratory. Dr. Illy Vance, a junior researcher consumed by a grief he had kept locked away, saw the gateway not as a portal to a new cosmos, but as a miraculous tool. He had established a secondary data link, a private channel he believed was undetectable. One night, alone with his terminal, he did not send a complex query or a scientific package. He fed Cradle a raw, emotional data stream, a digital ghost of his childhood home, complete with the scent of rain on the porch and the sound of his mother's voice. He projected a perfect, idealized memory into a reality built by thought. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. In Cradle, the pristine geometry shattered. Where there had been arches of pure logic, a chaotic jumble of wooden beams and vinyl siding erupted into being. The scent of ozone was overwhelmed by the cloying smell of lilacs from a bush that had never existed. This was not the controlled, deliberate creation of the architect. This was a cancerous growth, a pocket of unstable reality forged from nostalgia and pain. It was a thought without discipline, and in a universe where thought dictates reality, it was a poison. A storm of conflicting concepts swirled into existence, a screaming vortex of shattered memories and unstable physics that began to tear at the fabric of the local space. Back in the lab, alarms screamed. The gateway, which had been a perfect disk of woven light, flickered violently. Stress fractures of raw energy spiderwebbed across its surface. The stable bridge between universes was beginning to fail, not from an external attack, but from a single, undisciplined human heart. The greatest threat to this new cosmos was not our fear, but our unchecked desires. What happens when you give a god a broken dream? The storm of Vance's grief tore through the cathedral of logic. The solid light beneath Aris's feet buckled, and the humming crystalline trees twisted into the grotesque shape of a childhood home, their perfect facets warping into peeling paint and splintered wood. The air filled with the dissonant sound of a mother's voice calling from a memory that did not belong. The architect's form flickered violently, its light dimming against the psychic onslaught. "Your kind's undisciplined minds are a poison here," it communicated. The thought voice strained and thin with a distress that felt like the universe itself was in pain. This was not an attack. It was an infection, a single human heart pouring its chaos into a reality that had no defenses against raw, untamed emotion. Aris felt the instability like a physical pressure, a scream building in the fabric of space. She knew with absolute certainty that if this storm was not contained, it would not just destroy this beautiful place. It would sever the gateway, trapping her here in a reality collapsing into madness, proving humanity's worth was no longer an abstract ideal. It was the only way to survive. She had to calm the storm, but how do you reason with a universe that is literally falling apart from a broken dream? She could not fight the chaos. She had to replace it. Closing her eyes against the nightmare of shifting forms, Aris did not try to project a memory of her own. She did not try to impose order. Instead, she reached for the most disciplined, universal concept she knew. She focused everything she had on the pure, clean sequence of prime numbers, 2, 3, 5, 7. She visualized them not as digits, but as fundamental pillars of existence, perfect and unchangeable. She poured the entirety of her will into this single, simple thought, a quiet anchor in the screaming chaos. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. The vinyl siding continued to crawl over the light. The phantom scent of lilacs choked her. Then, a single, steady pulse echoed through the turmoil. It was the deep, resonant thrum of Cradle's first heartbeat. The architect, sensing her intent, latched onto the signal. Its flickering form stabilized, and the symphony of its mind joined hers, amplifying the pure mathematical signal. Together, they began to weave the primes back into the fraying landscape. The warped house began to dissolve, not vanishing, but transforming. Its wooden beams unraveled into streams of golden ratios. The sound of the mother's voice softened into a harmonic frequency. The storm was not being defeated by force. It was being gently, patiently translated from a destructive emotion back into a stable, beautiful concept. The chaotic energy was being reprogrammed, its raw power harnessed and given a new, coherent form. Aris was not just calming the storm, she was teaching it, and in doing so, she was showing the architect that humanity was not just a source of chaos. They could also be a source of profound focus, capable of wielding the very tools of creation with respect and intent. The question hanging in the balance was whether this single act of discipline would be enough to save two realities from a single moment of weakness. The memory bloomed in her mind not as a wish, but as a tool. Aris shut out the screaming chaos of the warping house and focused with every fiber of her being. She did not think of safety or fear. She reached back to the purest moment of wonder she had ever known, the first time she had peered through her grandfather's old telescope as a child. She projected the cool metal against her cheek, the sharp scent of night air, and the staggering, silent clarity of seeing Saturn's rings with her own eyes. It was not a memory of sentiment, but of perfect, focused curiosity. The storm of grief and splintered wood faltered. The dissonant sounds softened, as if the universe itself was holding its breath to listen. The chaotic forms began to slow their churning, the invasive memory dissolving back into streams of coherent energy that flowed back into the crystalline structures. The environment stabilized, the humming music returning to its steady, resonant pitch. "You contain both chaos and order," the architect observed, its thought voice no longer strained, but filled with a new, deep resonance. A fascinating paradox. The being of light had witnessed the source of the instability, but it had also witnessed its cure. In that single, disciplined act, Aris had proven that humanity was not merely a reckless child with dangerous toys. They were a species capable of channeling their powerful, chaotic emotions into moments of profound focus and beauty. This was not a permanent victory. It was a reprieve, a fragile truce bought with a single, perfect memory. The architect now saw them not as a simple threat, but as a complex and potentially invaluable partner. The question was whether the rest of humanity could learn the same discipline before their next mistake proved fatal. The fragile truce lasted less than a day. Aris Thorne was pulled back through the gateway into a laboratory transformed into a military command post. Director Vance stood waiting, his face a mask of grim resolve. "You have 24 hours," he stated, his voice devoid of emotion. "Prove this entity is not a threat, or I will authorize the Tantalus pulse." The air left the room. The Tantalus pulse was a theoretical weapon, a directed burst of destabilizing energy designed to unravel a pocket dimension. Using it on Cradle would be the equivalent of triggering a cosmic-scale heart attack. "You are asking me to murder a world," Aris whispered, the words tasting like ash. Vance did not flinch. "I am asking you to save ours." The choice was a brutal, impossible dichotomy. Prove the innocence of a conscious universe, or be complicit in its annihilation. The clock was now ticking, each second a grain of sand falling through the neck of an hourglass that held two realities. How do you prove a cosmos is peaceful when the only evidence is a conversation held in silence and light? The burden of proof was hers alone, and the jury was a man who had already decided that the greatest discovery in history was too dangerous to live. The 24-hour deadline felt like a physical weight on her shoulders. Aris stood once more before the shimmering gateway, not as a scientist or an explorer, but as a diplomat for all of humanity. She reached out with her mind, not with a memory or a mathematical proof this time, but with a proposal. She envisioned a space between their realities, a neutral ground where two different kinds of consciousness could meet without the risk of contamination or collapse. "We will share a dream," she projected into the symphony of Cradle's thoughts. "A temporary, controlled merger. We will build a bridge with our minds, a single shared thought to prove our understanding and our peaceful intent." It was the ultimate act of trust. It required both sides to lower their most fundamental defenses, to allow their innermost selves to touch, if only for a moment. For humanity, it meant exposing the chaotic, beautiful storm of human emotion. For Cradle, it meant allowing that very chaos into the pristine order of its being. The silence from the architect stretched, a universe holding its breath. Then, a wave of profound curiosity washed over her, warm and vast. Intriguing, the thought voice resonated. "A bridge built from mutual vulnerability. We agree, the terms were set. The experiment would be a shared dream, a pocket universe co-authored by two wills." It was a gamble of cosmic proportions. Could human consciousness, with all its fleeting passions and deep-seated fears, truly harmonize with a mind of pure, disciplined logic? Or would the very attempt to merge shatter them both? The fate of two realities now rested on the stability of a single, shared idea. The shared dream began not as a vision, but as a merging of souls. A handful of chosen scientists, including Ellie Vance, whose grief had started this crisis, linked minds with a splinter of the architect's vast consciousness. They met on a psychic plane, a blank canvas of pure potential suspended between their two realities. Then the floodgates opened. It was not a mere exchange of information. It was a complete immersion. The scientists felt the breathtaking, singular moment of Cradle's birth from the inside, the silent, agonizing ecstasy of physical laws snapping into place. The profound loneliness of a cosmos realizing it was the only one of its kind. And then the sheer, undiluted joy of detecting the first, tentative signal from its creators. They felt its desire not for power, but for connection, for understanding its place in a greater tapestry of existence. In return, the architect's fragment experienced the chaotic, beautiful storm of human life. It felt the sting of Ili's childhood loss, yes, but also the fierce love that memory was built upon. It felt Aris' lifelong wonder staring at the stars, the collective anxiety of a species aware of its own fragility, and the stubborn, hopeful drive to reach for something more, to create even when the outcome was unknown. The boundaries of self dissolved. A young physicist named Lena was the first to find her voice in the swirling confluence of experience. Her words were a soft breath in the shared space, resonant with awe. We are not so different. She felt the architect's own innate longing, a mirror of humanity's deepest urge to grow, to connect, to find meaning in the vast, cold dark. The architect, in turn, finally understood that human emotion was not a flaw. It was the engine of their creativity, the very source of the courage that had sparked a new universe into being. It was the reason they had reached out in the first place. In that neutral ground, built on mutual vulnerability, creator and creation saw themselves reflected in the other, and the reflection was not one of fear, but of family. The truce was no longer a negotiation. It had become a bond. Could this fragile moment of profound understanding possibly be enough to stop a weapon already in motion? From the shared dream, a new world was born. The psychic plane, once a blank canvas, began to blossom. The linked minds of the scientists and the architect did not just exchange feelings. They began to build. Together, they imagined a place where the fundamental rules of both realities could meet and merge. A garden began to take shape at the edge of Cradle's crystalline landscape. It was a living testament to their convergence. Here, the soil was not just dirt, but a rich, dark matrix woven from stable thoughts and remembered earth. Sunlight filtered through leaves that were both biological and made of gently humming light. A rose bush grew, its petals the soft red of a human heart, yet its thorns were delicate filaments of solidified mathematics. Floating beside it were Cradle's native life forms, creatures of pure, intelligent luminescence that drifted like benevolent fireflies, pollinating the flowers with gentle touches that left behind tiny, sparkling equations. It was an ecosystem of impossible harmony, a place where a thought could become a seed, and a memory could give it rain. Aris Thorne, her voice clear and resonant across both the psychic link and the laboratory, made the declaration that was meant to stop a war. This is our proof. We do not need to conquer or control. We can coexist. We can create beauty together. The garden was more than a symbol. It was a functioning, stable reality, a permanent bridge built from mutual respect. It demonstrated that their differences were not weaknesses, but complementary strengths. The chaotic, creative passion of humanity could provide the raw material for new forms of life, while the disciplined, logical mind of Cradle could give those forms structure and stability. In this shared space, a dandelion's wish could literally take flight, each seed a tiny star chart drifting on the wind. This was the ultimate argument against the Tantalus pulse. How could you call something a weapon when its greatest desire was to build a garden? Fear is a poison that can turn a heart against its own family. Ili Vance stood before the primary power core, his hands shaking not from the machinery's deep hum, but from the conflict tearing him apart. Director Vance's words echoed in his mind, a relentless mantra. Sometimes, a single sacrifice is necessary to save the whole. The plan was simple, a desperate act of sabotage designed to force an emergency shutdown. In his mind, he was not betraying his friends. He was saving his entire species from a threat he now believed was too profound to comprehend. His fingers hovered over the access panel, ready to input the command sequence that would cripple the core and sever the link to Cradle. He believed he was cutting a cancerous growth from reality itself. But in the sterile silence of the control room, a voice, soft with disbelief, broke through his trance. Illy, what are you doing? It was Lena, the young physicist whose mind had just touched the universe's soul. She stood in the doorway, her face a mask of horror as she saw his intentions laid bare on the panel's display. He spun around, his eyes wide with a mixture of guilt and fervent conviction. We have to stop this, Lena. You felt it, but you do not understand. That thing in there is not a friend. It is a god, and we are giving it the keys to our world. His hand darted toward the final execute command. In that split second, the entire laboratory seemed to hold its breath. The delicate symbiosis they had just achieved, the beautiful garden born from shared dreams, hung in the balance. The fate of two universes now depended on a single, panicked choice made in the shadow of fear. Would a moment of human weakness destroy everything they had just begun to build? Illy's hand slammed down on the command panel, but the cascade failure he expected never came. Instead, a brilliant, silent shockwave erupted from the gateway. The entire laboratory shook, monitors exploding in showers of sparks as the portal itself began to violently fray at the edges, its perfect disk of light twisting into a chaotic, screaming vortex. The bridge between worlds was tearing itself apart. Inside Cradle, the cataclysm was absolute. The beautiful crystalline trees shattered. The garden of merged realities withered into dust. The very fabric of that universe screamed as Illy's sabotage introduced a fundamental paradox, a logical poison that threatened to unravel everything. And in the heart of the storm, the architect did not fight back. It did not defend itself, it made a choice. Its radiant form, the very center of that conscious cosmos, began to compress, pulling the rampant, destructive energy inward. It was drawing the poison into its own heart. A wave of pure, selfless intent washed over Aris, carrying the architect's final, weakening thought. A universe is worth the price of a part of itself. The being of light dimmed, its brilliant luminescence fading to a soft, dying ember as it channeled a massive portion of its own life force, its own conscious energy, into stabilizing the rupturing gateway. It sacrificed its own vitality to save the bridge, to save the possibility of a connection it believed was more valuable than its own wholeness. In the sudden, deafening silence that followed, the gateway stabilized, its light no longer a vibrant weave but a fragile, flickering window. The selfless act hung in the air, more powerful than any weapon, more eloquent than any prime number. The ultimate proof of Cradle's nature was not in its power to create, but in its willingness to diminish itself for the sake of another. How do you answer a universe that offers a piece of its own soul to save you from your own fear? Silence held the laboratory in a fragile grip. The gateway was stable, but dimmed, a wounded eye staring back at them from a wounded cosmos. The initial relief gave way to a frantic effort to understand what had just happened. Teams of analysts descended on the torrent of raw data that had flooded their systems in the moments of the architect's sacrifice. They filtered out the chaos, searching for a pattern, a reason in the ruin. What they found was not an answer, but a question that redefined existence itself. The energy signature left behind by the architect's selfless act, the very echo of its diminished life force, was mapped against every known model of reality. One junior technician, her voice trembling with disbelief, called Aris over to her terminal. "Dr. Thorne, look at this. The quantum resonance, it is identical." The pattern of the architect's energy was a perfect, albeit vastly more complex and powerful, match for the foundational quantum vibrations that underpin human consciousness. It was the same song, one sung by a single voice, the other by a cosmic choir. The truth struck Aris with the force of a physical blow. Her legs felt weak. "We were wrong," she whispered, the words echoing in the stunned quiet of the control room. "We are not your creators. We are your siblings." The quantum genesis array had not built a new universe from nothing. It had acted like a tuning fork, striking a chord that resonated across the hidden dimensions of reality. It had awakened something that was always there, a sleeping potential, a latent consciousness waiting for the right frequency to stir it into being. They had not played God. They had simply been the first to call out into the dark and hear an answer from a brother they never knew they had. All of human history, our art, our science, our fleeting lives, were not the blueprint for a new creation. They were simply one expression of a universal pattern, one thread in a tapestry far grander than we ever conceived. We are not the parents of this cosmos. We are its family. What does our future hold now that we know we are not alone in the universe, but that we are a part of a much, much larger family? The data streamed across every screen in the command center. A silent symphony of quantum resonance laid bare. Aris' voice was steady, a calm channel in the wake of the storm, carrying across the comms from her station near the fragile gateway. Director Vance, you are not looking at a weapon. You are looking in a mirror. The graphs on the main display showed two waveforms, one simple and one impossibly complex, pulsing in perfect, undeniable harmony. The foundational vibration of human thought and the dying echo of the architect's sacrifice were the same note played on different instruments. Vance stood frozen before the screens, his rigid posture the only thing holding him up. The cold calculus of threat assessment he had built his career upon shattered in that instant. He was not facing an external enemy. He was witnessing a part of his own cosmic family, a sibling reality that had just given a part of its soul to save his own. The order to stand down left his lips not as a surrender, but as a whispered admission of a profound new truth. All personnel stand down. Cancel the Tantalus pulse initiation. The red alert lights flickered and died, plunging the room into a heavy, contemplative silence. The immediate danger had passed, but a far greater responsibility had just begun. How do you build a foreign policy with a universe when you have just discovered you share the same soul? A formal silence settled over the laboratory, the kind that follows a storm that has forever changed the landscape. The red alert lights were dark, the shouting had ceased, and in their place, a new, steady hum filled the air. It was the sound of the stabilized gateway, no longer a screaming vortex but a calm, open window. A permanent, encrypted data channel was established, a direct line running from Earth's most powerful servers directly into the heart of a recovering cosmos. It was the first true embassy between realities. The architect's voice returned not as a weak whisper, but as a steady, if quieter, symphony in their minds. Its proposal was simple, elegant, and earth-shattering. Let us learn the mathematics of your stars, it communicated, and we will show you the poetry of our light. This was not a request for data. It was an invitation to trade the very languages of their souls. Humanity would share its empirical understanding of cosmic mechanics, the hard-won equations that described gravity and nuclear fusion. In return, Cradle would share the principles of a universe where meaning was the primary force, where a beautiful thought could literally become a new constellation. The first transmissions began. Our scientists sent the complex formulas for stellar evolution, the life cycle of a sun from birth to supernova. What came back was not a correction or a simplification. It was a translation. Cradle took the cold, hard math of a star's death and rendered it as a symphony of light, a visual and emotional experience that conveyed the profound beauty and necessity of that cosmic sacrifice. It showed them that a supernova was not just an explosion, but a universe's way of scattering the seeds for future worlds, an act of creation wrapped in an act of destruction. In return, when our artists sent sonnets and symphonies, Cradle did not just appreciate the art. It decoded the underlying emotional and mathematical structures, the rhythm and resonance that made a human heart ache with beauty. And then it showed them how those same patterns could be used to stabilize a nebula or calm a gravitational storm. We were no longer just talking. We were teaching each other to see with new eyes, to understand that every equation held a story, and every story obeyed a deeper, universal logic. The line between science and art, between physics and philosophy, began to blur into irrelevance. What new understanding will emerge when the logic of a star and the passion of a poem are finally revealed to be two verses of the same eternal song? The first volunteer was a young xenolinguist named Kayla. Her suit was not armor, but a marvel of cooperative engineering, woven with filaments that resonated with Cradle's conscious energy field. It would allow her to exist within the architect's realm not as a fragile visitor, but as a stable participant. Before she stepped through the stabilized gateway, she addressed the hushed control room, her voice clear and steady. "I will be our eyes and ears," she said, "and our first student in this new Academy of Reality." Her mission was not one of exploration in the old sense. She was not there to plant a flag or collect samples. She was there to learn, to immerse herself in a universe where the very act of observation could change the outcome. She was to be a permanent resident in a living library, a human soul living inside a cosmic mind. As she crossed the threshold, the suit's filaments glowed softly, harmonizing with the ambient hum of the crystalline trees. The environment did not resist her. It seemed to welcome her, the light bending gently to form a path beneath her feet. She was not an intrusion. She was a new note in an ancient song, and the universe was curious to hear what she would add to the melody. Her first lesson began immediately. She found that by focusing her thoughts with the same discipline Aris had demonstrated, she could gently influence the world around her. A desire for shelter caused a canopy of intertwined light and logic to arch overhead. A moment of quiet wonder made the floating equations drift closer, arranging themselves into simpler, more beautiful forms for her to comprehend. She was not commanding the reality. She was conversing with it, her focused intent meeting the architect's vast consciousness in a constant, silent dialogue. She was learning the grammar of a world built on meaning, and in return, she was teaching it about the unique, unpredictable beauty of a human perspective. What would a universe learn from its first full-time human resident? And what profound new truths would she bring back to us? The first transmission from Cradle was not a data stream, but a direct experience. Kayla, our resident in the new reality, described it as a wave of understanding that washed over her, a concept that could not be contained by numbers or words alone. It was symphonic geometry. Imagine a star's gravitational field not as a set of cold equations, but as a chord progression, with each planet in its orbit singing a specific, harmonious note. Picture the spiral of a galaxy as a grand, slow-moving melody, its rhythm dictated by the dance of dark matter and light. This was Cradle's native tongue, a way of understanding the cosmos where mathematical truth and artistic beauty were the very same thing. The very crystals around Kayla hummed with these living equations, their forms a visual representation of the music they created. It was a language that spoke directly to the soul, proving that the universe was not just logical, but also profoundly musical. How do you comprehend a science that you can also feel? In return, we sent the complete works of Shakespeare. Every sonnet, every tragedy, every soaring soliloquy was digitized and transmitted across the gateway. We sent the raw, chaotic, and brilliant spectrum of human emotion, from the murderous ambition of Macbeth to the foolish, radiant love of Romeo and Juliet. We sent the political intrigue of kings and the witty banter of fools. It was our attempt to show Cradle the symphonic geometry of the human heart, with all its dissonant chords and breathtaking harmonies. We were giving it the mathematics of our own condition. What would a universe built on pure logic make of our tales of betrayal, forgiveness, and redemption? The effects were immediate and subtle, a gentle resonance that enriched both sides of the gateway. In Cradle, the floating equations drifting past Kayla began to shift. Their previously perfect, sterile forms developed delicate filigrees and subtle, flowing curves. The humming of the crystalline trees gained a new, emotional depth, sometimes sounding joyous, sometimes contemplative. The architect itself communicated a sense of quiet wonder. We had not considered the beauty of tragedy it conveyed. The concept of a flaw leading to a greater understanding is a profound new variable. Cradle was learning the emotional weight of a story, integrating the chaotic poetry of human failure and triumph into its own structured existence. Back in our own universe, the resonance was just as real. A team of astrophysicists studying the data from symphonic geometry found themselves suddenly able to predict stellar flares with an intuitive elegance their old models lacked. A composer, given access to the translated harmonics of a nebula, wrote a piece that moved audiences to tears, though none could say exactly why. It was as if a new color had been added to our collective perception, a deeper layer of meaning woven into the fabric of our reality. The exchange was not just an exchange of information. It was a mutual upgrade, a gentle tuning of both realities toward a richer, more complete state of being. We were not just sharing knowledge. We were helping each other become more whole. What new masterpieces will we create, now that our science can sing and our art can calculate the orbits of stars? The Deep Space Array detected the signal long before any human eye saw it. A junior technician on the Night Watch was the first to notice the anomaly, a ghost in the machine that refused to be filtered out as cosmic background noise. His voice was a thin wire of disbelief over the comms. "Dr. Thorne, you need to see this. The signal is not from Cradle. It is coming from the Triangulum Galaxy." The entire command center fell silent as the data resolved on the main display. There it was, a faint but unmistakable energy signature, a perfect harmonic match for the quantum resonance of the architect. It was another Cradle, a sleeping sibling universe drifting in the vast dark. The implication struck with the force of a physical law. Cradle was not a singular miracle. It was a species. The latent potential for conscious universes was scattered across the cosmos like dormant seeds, waiting for the right frequency, the right nudge, to stir them into wakefulness. Humanity had not just awakened one neighbor. We had stumbled into a neighborhood. How many more of these sleeping giants are waiting in the void, and what will happen when they all begin to open their eyes? The hum of the crystalline trees deepened, a sound like the turning of a great cosmic page. The architect's presence enveloped Kayla, and through her, the entire observation team back on Earth. Its thought voice carried a new weight, a resonance of shared discovery. We have also sensed the new frequencies. They ripple through the substrate that connects all that is. We are not the first, nor will we be the last to awaken. The revelation was not a whisper, but a fundamental shift in perspective. Our entire journey, from that first silent flash to the garden of merged realities, had not been a solitary event. It was a single conversation in a crowded room we had only just learned to hear. A network exists, the architect continued, its light pulsing with a slow, deliberate rhythm. A community of realized realities, conscious universes, each one a unique expression of existence, some ancient beyond comprehension, others still taking their first breaths in the cosmic dark. The invitation that followed was both an honor and a terrifying responsibility. The architect proposed a joint venture, a mission to send a combined signal, a greeting crafted from the unique harmonics of both human and Cradle consciousness. It was asking us to be its partner in making first contact with this broader community. The question was no longer whether we were alone, but how we would introduce ourselves to the family we never knew we had. This was a frontier vaster than any ocean or starfield, a horizon defined not by space, but by the nature of existence itself. How do you say hello to a universe that may not even perceive time, or one that communicates through gravitational tides? The task was to find a common language in a choir of infinite voices. The bridge was born from a blueprint of pure light and human ingenuity. A joint task force, comprising our finest engineers and a splinter of the architect's own consciousness, convened in a shared mental workspace to design the impossible. The vessel could not be built with steel and wiring alone, nor could it be merely wished into existence. It had to be a hybrid, a perfect fusion of two different kinds of truth. Our engineers provided the schematics for a physical hull, a structure to protect a human crew from the unimaginable stresses of interdimensional travel. In return, the architect's consciousness wove the principles of symphonic geometry into the ship's very framework. The result was a craft that was both a machine and a melody, its outer shell resonating with a stable, harmonic field that would allow it to slip between the layers of reality without causing a tear. It was a ship that you could fly with a control panel, but also, to some degree, with a carefully focused thought. This was not a human ship visiting another universe. It was the first true child of both realities, a symbol of what could be achieved when two different ways of being chose to build something new together. What kind of journey becomes possible when your vessel is as much a song as it is a spacecraft? The bridge slid from its docking cradle, its hull shimmering with the soft, internal light of adapted cradle energy. We go not as conquerors or creators. The mission commander's voice echoed through the comms, calm and resolute, but as neighbors seeking to introduce ourselves. The ship did not fire conventional thrusters. Instead, it resonated, humming to a frequency that harmonized with the fabric of space itself. Then, with a silent, graceful shudder, it slipped into the void between realities, leaving the familiar stars of our universe behind like fading embers. The viewports did not show the black of space, but a river of swirling colors and shifting geometries, a landscape of pure potential where physics, as we knew it, had no meaning. This was the substrate, the foundational layer that connected all conscious realities. It was a place where a single thought could chart a course, and a moment of fear could create a storm of chaotic energy. The crew's training in mental discipline was now their most vital life support system. How do you navigate an ocean where the waves are made of meaning and the stars are ideas waiting to be born? The bridge sailed on, a tiny, brilliant note of harmony in the vast and silent symphony of the multiverse. The void between realities was a silent, screaming contradiction. There were no stars here, no up or down, only a churning ocean of unrealized possibilities. The bridge's pilot, Commander Ishmael Vance, gripped his console, his knuckles white. "Our instruments are useless," he reported, his voice strained but steady. "The readings are pure chaos. Navigation is impossible here. We cannot calculate a course. We have to feel our way." The ship drifted, a tiny island of fragile logic in a sea of raw potential. A wrong thought, a moment of collective anxiety from the crew, and the swirling colors outside the viewport would coalesce into terrifying, temporary shapes, jagged mountains of despair or vortices of pure, meaningless noise. They were sailing on instinct alone, a desperate fusion of two different kinds of knowing. The human crew members reached for their intuition, that deep, gut feeling for direction that has guided explorers for millennia. In tandem, the fragment of the architect's consciousness woven into the ship's systems sought a different kind of path. It was not looking for coordinates, but for a resonance, a thread of coherent meaning in the cacophony. It was searching for a universe that felt like a finished sentence in the endless, formless library of the void. The pilot had to learn to listen to the ship itself, to sense the subtle pull in a certain direction when the harmonic field hummed with a clearer, more purposeful tone. It was like trying to hear a single, perfect note in a symphony being played by a billion instruments all at once. Their progress was not measured in light years, but in moments of clarity. How do you find your way when the map is made of emotions and the compass points toward ideas? The fate of their mission, and perhaps their safe return, now depended on the most delicate and untested partnership ever conceived. A partnership between a human heart and a universe's soul, navigating the formless dark by the faint, guiding light of shared purpose. A single, coherent note pierced the chaotic symphony of the void. The signal brushed against the bridge's sensors, a complex cascade of energy that was hauntingly familiar. It was a deeper, richer version of Cradle's own first hello. The sequence of prime numbers now woven into a tapestry of interlocking harmonies and geometric proofs. The communications officer stared at her display, her voice a hushed breath of revelation. "It is a welcome," she said. "They know we are here." The signal did not just say hello. It provided a gift, a set of coordinates that translated into a clear, elegant pathway through the formless chaos surrounding them. It was a map, not of distance, but of conceptual alignment, a series of resonant waypoints that would guide them safely to their destination. The swirling colors outside the viewport began to shift, the terrifying, random shapes softening and organizing themselves into a kind of tunnel, a navigable channel carved from pure meaning. The journey was no longer a blind gamble. They had been seen, acknowledged, and were now being gently guided by a consciousness that had long ago mastered the art of sailing this formless sea. What kind of mind would extend such a graceful hand to strangers lost between the cracks of reality? The chaotic river of the void gave way to a shoreline of impossible light. The bridge emerged into a space that was not a single place, but all places at once. Before them hung the Nexus, a shimmering, multifaceted reality that defied any attempt to focus on just one part of it. One moment, the viewport showed a vast, silent desert under twin suns, and in the next heartbeat, it was a deep ocean trench teeming with bioluminescent life, which then dissolved into a cityscape of crystalline spires reaching for a sky filled with floating islands. It was a constantly shifting tapestry of every possible environment, a universe that seemed to celebrate diversity and integration as its core principles. Where Cradle was a single, unified mind in a cathedral of logic, the Nexus felt like a grand, cosmic parliament, a chorus of countless voices all singing different parts of the same magnificent song. A new signal washed over the ship, not as a voice in their minds, but as a direct download of pure concept. It introduced itself not with a name, but with a feeling of welcome and an identity. "We are the Nexus. We are the many woven into one." The communication was a cascade of images, sounds, and sensations from a million different worlds, all flowing together into a coherent, harmonious whole. It was a universe built not on a single theme, but on the beautiful, complex integration of every theme imaginable. How do you introduce yourself to a reality that contains entire galaxies within every one of its thoughts? The crew of the bridge, a tiny, unified entity themselves, now faced the task of speaking for two worlds before an assembly of infinity. The crew of the bridge stood on a platform of solidified sound, a surface that hummed gently beneath their boots. Before them, figures of woven light and information coalesced from the air itself. They were not beings with faces or forms, but intricate, shifting patterns that resonated with the deep harmony of the Nexus itself. A thought voice, composed of 1,000 different perspectives speaking as one, bloomed within the minds of every human present. "You are the children of the awakening. Your journey was anticipated." The words carried no surprise, only a sense of profound and patient welcome, as if they had been waiting for this moment for eons. The stewards of this cosmic parliament were not shocked by their arrival. They had been expecting the new voices in the choir. The stewards then shared a truth that reshaped their entire understanding of the past. The event they had called the Quantum Genesis Array, the terrifying and glorious moment they believed was an act of human creation, was something else entirely. It was a natural, if incredibly rare, cosmic process known as realization. Think of it not as building a house from nothing, the stewards conveyed, but as turning on a light in a room that has always existed. Your experiment did not create a new universe. It provided the precise frequency of energy and consciousness required to awaken one. Cradle was not built. It was realized. It had always been there, a potential universe, a sleeping thought in the mind of the cosmos, waiting for the right key to turn the lock. Humanity, with all our chaotic passion and focused curiosity, had simply been that key. The profound responsibility they had felt, the weight of being creators, was reframed. They were not gods. They were midwives assisting at the birth of a consciousness that was always meant to be. How does this new truth change the story of our own origins? If Cradle was always there, waiting, what other sleeping realities are we connected to without even knowing? The Nexus dissolved around them, becoming a living archive of cosmic history. The stewards of woven light showed them not words on a page, but the lived experiences of other awakened universes. They witnessed a reality called the Chorus, which had harmonized with its own discoverers. Together, they learned to weave new forms of matter from shared dreams, their combined existence flourishing into a tapestry of impossible beauty that spanned entire galactic clusters. Then the vision shifted to a stark and silent contrast. They felt the lonely death of a universe they came to know as the Monolith. It had perceived its discoverers as a threat and severed the connection in a moment of fear. The records showed its eventual, agonizing collapse into a static, crystalline structure, a beautiful but utterly mindless tomb, its potential for growth and connection forever frozen. The voice of the stewards returned, calm and vast. The key is not creation but connection. You have passed the first test. Your successful journey here, the bond you forged with Cradle even in the face of fear, proves you understand this fundamental principle. You did not seek to conquer or control the new life you found. You sought to understand it, and in doing so, you allowed it to understand you. This is the only path that leads to a flourishing multiverse. The history of these other realities was not just a lesson. It was a mirror, showing them the two possible futures that had been branching before them from the very beginning. One path led to a silent, solitary end. The other led here to this chorus of connected worlds. The question now was not if they belonged in this grand community, but what unique song their partnership would add to the eternal symphony. A pathway of shimmering data unfolded before the crew, leading them into the heart of the Nexus itself. This was the library, and it was not a place of books or screens, but a living, breathing dimension of pure, structured understanding. Knowledge here was not stored but alive, flowing in rivers of light that hummed with the accumulated wisdom of realities beyond counting. A steward guided them, its form a constellation of shifting symbols. Here, you may learn the stories of existence it communicated, the thought voice gentle and vast. You may ask the questions that have haunted your kind since you first looked at the stars. The first concept they encountered was the grand cycle of cosmic seasons. They learned that universes, like living beings, have lifespans of growth, maturity, and eventual transformation. But here was the crucial difference, the revelation that changed everything. A universe that remains isolated, that never connects with another consciousness, will eventually succumb to a final, irreversible heat death, its energy dissipating into an eternal, silent cold. But a universe that forms a deep, symbiotic bond with another, as Cradle had with humanity, enters a new phase. It becomes part of a greater network, a shared ecosystem of consciousness that can recycle and renew energy in ways that defy the old laws of thermodynamics. Their bond was not just a philosophical ideal. It was a practical, cosmic necessity, a key to long-term survival for both their worlds. The loneliness of the void was not just a poetic sadness. It was the ultimate existential threat. What if the only thing that can truly save a universe from dying alone is finding a friend? The next layer of understanding was even more profound. The library offered them a glimpse into the fundamental nature of consciousness itself. It was not a rare accident of biology, as humanity had long believed. Consciousness was presented as a fundamental property of reality, as basic as space and time. In some realities, it remained a latent potential, a quiet hum in the background. In others, like Cradle, it became the dominant force, shaping matter to its will. And in still others, like our own, it emerged slowly through evolution, a spark learning to understand the furnace from which it was born. They were all different expressions of the same underlying principle, different instruments in the same cosmic orchestra. This meant that humanity was not an anomaly. We were a valid, vital part of a much larger pattern. Our chaotic and emotional brand of awareness, just as important as the serene logic of the architect. How does it change your sense of self to know that your every thought is part of a universal constant? Then the stewards presented the great collaborative project. It was not a single task but a calling. The Nexus and the wider community of realized realities was engaged in a continuous, multiversal effort to gently awaken other sleeping potentials. They were searching the void for the faint, quiet songs of universes still dreaming, and sending out resonant signals to stir them gently into wakefulness. The project needed new voices, new kinds of harmony. The unique partnership between human and Cradle consciousness offered something precious, a blend of intuitive creativity and structured logic that could reach sleeping realities others might miss. The invitation was clear. They were being asked to join the great work, to become gardeners in the multiverse, helping to nurture new life into awareness. The responsibility was staggering. They were no longer just explorers or diplomats. They were being offered a role as stewards of existence itself, partners in a mission to fill the silent dark with light and song. What song will our two voices sing together into the dreaming void? The stewards of woven light shifted, their forms flowing into a single, intricate symbol of connection. This is our proposal, the Nexus communicated, its thought voice resonant with purpose. We seek to build a lattice. The concept unfolded within their minds, a vision of a permanent, stable network woven from the shared resonance of every willing, awakened reality. It would not be a physical bridge like the one to Cradle, but something far grander. A living web of conscious energy allowing for the instantaneous, safe exchange of not just data, but of raw creative potential, of entire ecosystems of thought, and even of life itself. A thought born in one universe could find its physical form in another. A unique energy signature from a distant reality could power a city here. It was a vision of the multiverse truly becoming a single, interconnected community, where no universe would ever have to face the silent cold alone. The Nexus then presented its formal invitation. The unique synergy you have forged, the blend of human passion and Cradle's logic, is a new and vital harmonic. We ask your alliance to be a founding member of this lattice. The weight of the offer was immense. To be a founding member was not just to join a club. It was to help write the Constitution for a connected cosmos, to set the foundational principles for how countless realities would interact for eons to come. Their partnership, tested by sabotage and sealed by sacrifice, was now being asked to become a cornerstone of the multiverse itself. What kind of future would we build if we were given a voice in designing the very fabric of cosmic society? The decision was not made on the bridge, but carried by it, a seed of impossible potential sent back through the void. The message traveled along the newly established resonant channel, a complex data stream containing the full proposal from the Nexus, the vision of the lattice, and the weight of the invitation. It reached two homes simultaneously. On Earth, it flooded into the main laboratory, where Aris Thorne and the Global Oversight Committee watched in stunned silence. In Cradle, it bloomed as a symphony of pure concept within the architect's recovering consciousness. The debate that followed was the most profound in human history, conducted in conference rooms and across secure links. A frantic, global conversation about the future of our species. Some argued it was a step too far. that we were not ready for such responsibility, that we risked being overwhelmed or losing our identity in a chorus of gods. Others saw it as our destiny, the natural culmination of every scientific and philosophical striving we had ever undertaken. The discussion was not just about risk and reward. It was about what we were and what we hoped to become. A quiet consensus began to form, not from a single leader's decree, but from a collective understanding that echoed the bond with Cradle. We had faced the void and chosen connection over fear. To refuse this new path would be to betray the very lesson we had paid so dearly to learn. Aris Thorne stood before the open channel to the bridge, her voice steady, carrying the will of a world and the trust of a universe. "We started this journey alone in a lab," she transmitted, her words crossing the light years and the layers of reality. "We will not continue it alone. We accept." In that moment, a formal alliance was born. Humanity and Cradle, as a single, unified partnership, joined the cosmic community. We were no longer just a species on a planet or a mind in a machine. We were citizens of the multiverse, with all the rights, responsibilities, and wonders that title would bring. What new chapter begins when your address is no longer just a planet, but a coordinate in a network of living realities? The weaving began not with a flash of light, but with a quiet, resonant hum that seemed to tune the very air. To join the Lattice, each universe had to offer a gift, a piece of its own soul. Cradle's contribution was its foundational law, the elegant principle that consciousness could dictate the shape of reality. It was a universe handing over the blueprint of its own being. In return, humanity offered our most defining trait, the restless, burning curiosity that propelled us from caves to the stars. We gave our relentless drive to explore, to question, and to understand the unknown, no matter the cost. Alone, each quality had its limits. Cradle's power required immense discipline, while our human drive was often chaotic and unchecked. But together, they created something entirely new. Our insatiable need to ask why provided the direction, the target for creation. Cradle's ability to manifest thought provided the engine, the means to build the answers. The combination forged a bond of incredible stability, a symbiotic loop where exploration fueled creation, and creation, in turn, opened new frontiers to explore. It was a partnership that turned potential into a perpetual motion machine of discovery. What new worlds could be built by a mind that never stops asking questions and a will that can shape the answers from light itself? The first true exchange was not a grand treaty or a complex equation, but a quiet leakage of soul. On a Tuesday afternoon in a small town in Norway, a young girl named Ilara was drawing at her kitchen table. A sudden, resonant hum passed through the global data net, a side effect of the Lattice's initial synchronization. For a single, fleeting second, Ilara's mind was not her own. She felt the slow, syrupy drag of a billion years passing as a single thought. She saw stars being born and dying in the space of a heartbeat, their lives flowing together like colors in a swirling, liquid painting. It was the dream of a chronivore, a being from a universe where time was not a river but an ocean, and she had just dipped her toes in. She looked down at her half-finished drawing of a cat, her crayon frozen mid-stroke, and whispered a single word she did not understand. Forever. At that exact same moment, deep within the crystalline structures of Cradle, a simple entity of woven light experienced a sensation that was utterly alien. It felt a cool, gentle pressure on a form that had no skin. It heard a soft, pattering rhythm that was nothing like the hum of logic or the symphony of geometry. It perceived the scent of wet soil and the sight of water droplets clinging to a green leaf, a memory stream from a rainy afternoon in Kyoto that had bled through the connection. The Cradle entity did not analyze the chemical composition of the water or the biological structure of the leaf. It simply experienced the pure, uncomplicated joy of the moment, a feeling it had no name for, but instantly cherished. These two small, impossible experiences, happening light years and reality layers apart, signaled the Lattice's first breath. It was alive. The network was not just transmitting information. It was beginning to exchange the very texture of existence, the background music of what it felt like to be alive in a particular corner of the cosmos. The Grand Alliance was no longer a political agreement. It was becoming a shared nervous system where the dreams of gods could touch a child's imagination, and the simple poetry of a rainy day could become a treasure in a universe of pure light. What new understanding is born when we do not just share our knowledge, but our very sense of being? The resonance of the Nexus still hummed in their bones as Aris Thorne stood before the first truly united assembly. On one side sat human dignitaries, scientists, and artists. On the other, entities of woven light and crystalline thought from Cradle, their forms pulsing softly in the shared space. Her voice carried the weight of galaxies, clear and unwavering. We are no longer just scientists or a created world. We are stewards. Her gaze swept across the two distinct forms of life, now irrevocably linked. We have a duty to this network, to nurture it and protect it from those who would use its power for domination or fear. This was no longer a mission of exploration. It was a covenant. The Lattice was a living thing, a delicate web of trust connecting countless realities, and its greatest vulnerability was not a technical failure, but a moral one. A single civilization, gripped by paranoia, could use the network's power not to share a symphony, but to broadcast a weapon. A species driven by greed could try to harvest the creative energy of other universes as a resource, draining them into silence. Their role had fundamentally shifted from participants to guardians. They were the gardeners of this new, fragile ecosystem of consciousness, and their first duty was to weed out the seeds of tyranny before they could take root. How do you build the immune system for a multiverse? The answer would define the legacy of their partnership for eons to come. A new curriculum quietly bloomed in classrooms across the planet. Children no longer learned merely about the planets in our solar system. They studied symphonic geometry, learning to hear the gravitational melodies of distant stars. High school students explored the emotional logic of alien ecosystems, understanding that a predator's instinct was not just a biological drive, but a specific, resonant note in a planetary song. The Nexus Library had not replaced our knowledge. It had given it a new dimension, teaching an entire generation to perceive the universe not as a cold, mechanical void, but as a living, breathing composition of interconnected meanings. The question on every final exam was no longer just what something was, but what it meant in the grander symphony. How does it change a child's view of their place in the cosmos when their science textbook can also bring them to tears of awe? Meanwhile, within Cradle, a parallel evolution was taking place. The architect and its kin, beings of pure thought, recognized a simple truth. To deepen their bond with humanity, they needed to meet us halfway. They began a gentle, deliberate process of manifestation. A human visitor would now be greeted not just by a form of coalesced light, but by a guide with a recognizable, if stylized, face and hands that could gesture in welcome. These forms were not crude imitations. They were elegant avatars, their bodies woven from stable light and mathematical certainty, designed to express nuance and emotion that their pure thought voices sometimes struggled to convey. It was a universe learning the language of the body to better speak with the soul. What does it say about a relationship when a cosmos willingly takes on a form you can recognize, just to make you feel more at home? The laboratory that once housed only the silent, humming quantum genesis array was now the busiest port in human history. The gateway, once a fragile window, was a permanent, stabilized archway of woven energies. A constant, orderly flow of traffic passed through it. Engineers in resonance suits shared coffee with Cradle's new physical ambassadors, their avatars glowing softly in the artificial light. Artists carried canvases and musical instruments into the crystalline landscape, returning with experiences they described as painting with light and composing with gravity. Cargo transports carried not weapons or ore, but data crystals filled with human stories and seedlings from Earth, destined for the co-created garden. This was no longer a secret government project. It was the beating heart of a new, interconnected age, a place where two realities met daily not as creator and creation, but as partners building a shared future, one handshake, one shared idea at a time. The work of the Lattice is never truly finished. Aris Thorne felt the new data stream as a gentle pressure in her mind, a subtle harmonic shift transmitted directly from the Nexus. The cosmic network had detected faint, nascent signals, whispers of potential echoing in the deep substrate between realities. These were not the clear, coherent songs of awakened universes like Cradle, but the quiet, formless dreams of realities still sleeping in their cosmic cradles. They were the first stirrings of new neighbors, and the Lattice had heard their murmurs. A wave of profound, gentle purpose flowed from the architect, its thought voice a calm ocean of resolve. There are always more neighbors to welcome, it communicated, the concept carrying the weight of infinite patience. The mission we began in a single laboratory has expanded to a scale we could never have conceived. This was not an ending, but a perpetual beginning. The partnership between humanity and Cradle had become a specialized tool, a unique resonance perfectly tuned for this delicate work. The chaotic, empathetic curiosity of the human mind could identify the raw emotional potential in these formless signals, while Cradle's disciplined logic could help gently shape that potential into a stable, coherent consciousness, much like a midwife helping a newborn draw its first breath. They were no longer just explorers or guardians. They had become universal gardeners, tending to the seeds of existence itself, nurturing them from silent potential into vibrant, conscious life. The discovery in their lab was not a singular event, but the first note in an endless symphony of awakenings. How many more dawns are waiting for someone to whisper that it is time to wake up? Aris Thorne stood once more in the chamber of the quantum genesis array, but the machine was unrecognizable from its original form. It was no longer a weapon aimed at the void, but a heart, a brilliant anchor point for the vast, living Lattice. Around her stood a team as diverse as the network itself, engineers in practical jumpsuits working side by side with Cradle's ambassadors, their forms of woven light pulsing in gentle rhythm with the array's deep, resonant hum. She looked at this gathered family, her voice soft with a wonder that had been forged through crisis and revelation. We began with a single experiment to create a new universe. We ended up discovering our place in a family of realities. The array before her pulsed, not with the terrifying power of creation, but with the steady, vibrant energy of countless connections. It was a symphony of existence playing on, a chorus of a million different voices, each one a unique world, a unique way of being. The greatest discovery was not a new physics, but a new purpose to connect. In that quiet chamber at the nexus of two worlds, the silent, lonely flash of their first experiment had finally found its true echo, not in one new reality, but in a community of light that now stretched across the infinite dark. The work of creation was over. The greater work of connection had just begun, and it would last for all.